Welcome to the third in our series of the Start course. And this session we're looking at who is Jesus. Well, I want to start by asking a question. What evidence do we actually have that Jesus existed? And there is evidence, both from Christians and non-Christians. So let's look first at the Christian evidence. Well, the most important evidence is from the New Testament. But there are other letters sent at that time from one Christian to another, and lots of other letters and books. But I want to first read you the beginning of Luke's Gospel, because the Gospel of Luke is one of the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this is how it starts. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Now Luke was a doctor, and he had a very clinical mind, and he carefully wrote this letter so that we could have confidence that what he was writing was true. But of course you might argue, well, I can't trust a Christian because they'd be biased. But that might be rather silly, because if I really wanted to find out something, I would ask somebody who had a particular interest in that area, because they're much more likely to know. I wouldn't ask my son about gardening, but I might ask a member of the congregation who worked in a garden centre or who had a very beautiful garden. The New Testament remains our strongest evidence for the existence of Jesus, because it was written by people who were with Jesus and spent time alongside him. And they were convinced that he was who he said he was. But there's also evidence from non-Christians. Josephus was a Jewish historian, and he was born AD 37, which is just a couple of years after Jesus died. And he wrote about the history of the Jewish faith. And he wrote about from the very first Jew, Abraham, in 1800s BC, and all the way through, including the time when Jesus was alive. And this is what he wrote about the time when Jesus was alive. And then there arose at this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of marvellous deeds, a teacher of men, who received the truth with pleasure. He led away many Jews, and also many of the Greeks. And when Pilate had condemned him to the cross of his impeachments by the chief men among us, those who had loved him at the first did not cease. And even now the tribe of the Christians, so named after him, has not died out. Josephus wasn't a Christian, and he wasn't in favour of Christianity. But as far as he was concerned, Jesus definitely existed. And if we had time, we could look at the most famous Roman historian of the day, Tacitus. And likewise, he refers to Jesus as a historical figure. But the question is not, did Jesus exist? But did he do the things that they said he did? And is it true, the things that he said about himself? Is it all true? Well, today there's great fascination about Jesus. Every day, 78,000 people become Christians, and every week 1,000 new churches are built in Africa and in Asia, and 34% of the world population are Christians. In this country, lots of people become disillusioned about the church, but there is still lots of interest in Jesus. There are films, books, programs written about him. The Bible remains a bestseller year in, year out. We're going to come back to some of the claims about Jesus in a moment, but first of all, I want you to stop the video in a minute to look at the worksheet and the section called "What do you know about Jesus already?" And I want you to see how many questions you think you know the answer to. Now, it's very easy for me because I have the answers in front of you, so don't worry if you can't answer them all, or if you're a bit confused about some of them, because we're going to work through them afterwards. But if I could ask you now to just stop the video and do what you can on that section. Okay, so where was he born? Now, he was born in Bethlehem, but actually he was brought up in Nazareth. And his date of birth, well, we might think that it was the 25th of December, year naught. But really, we don't have any idea of the day of the year, and he probably wasn't born in the year naught. When the calendar was fixed, people did their very best to work out the year when Jesus was born by working backwards, but they got it a bit wrong. We think now that it's probably more likely that he was born BC 4, but we're not absolutely sure whether we're right about that. And we're not actually sure the time that he was born. Now, his religion was Jewish because his parents were both Jews and he was brought up as a Jew. Social class, well, Joseph was a carpenter, a skilled tradesman, probably regarded as upper working class. And his father's occupation? Well, Joseph was a carpenter. But God, his real father, was creator of the world. His education, well, he didn't go to school, but he would have been taught within the synagogues. His likely income, well, as a carpenter, he would have been paid, and he would have been quite reasonably well paid. But if he was a preacher, he would have been very poorly paid, or perhaps not even at all. But he would have been looked after by those that followed him, by his family and by his friends. Marital status, well, he wasn't married, he was single. Friends and associates, well, he had many important upper class friends who had key roles, but he also had lots of friends at the very bottom of the pile, the common people who loved and followed him. Character weaknesses. Well, some argue that he lost his temper in the temple, overturning the tables. But others have argued that actually that was rather stage managed and it was righteous anger. Any unusual behaviour patterns? Well, plenty. He walked on water. He fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He healed people. He turned water into wine. 3 key things about him. Now, Jesus was human, just like anyone else. He had a job, he had brothers, he had a family, he ate, he slept, and he cried. He cried when his friend Lazarus died. He had emotions. He got tired and he bled, and he suffered. I'm going to read you something now from Mark 6, and it's verse number 1. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given to him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, and the son of James, Joseph, Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offence at him. Because to them, he was just an ordinary person. They knew him. They'd seen him grow up as part of his family. He was just like any other human to them. The second thing is he was divine, because at other times he looks anything but human. I'm going to read you something now from John 14, verse 8. I've got to find it first. Here we are. Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." So Jesus, on this occasion, and many others, claimed to be God. He stilled the storm. Where did he get so much power? He taught big crowds, and he gathered huge numbers wherever he went and preached. How did he get so much authority? He healed people. How did he do that? So one minute he was human, and the next he was divine. And the third thing, he reconciles us. So I'm going to read you something now from 2 Corinthians, and it's chapter 5, verse 19. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them. Now, Jesus came to reconcile you and me and everyone to himself. He can take hold of our hand, and he can empathise with us on a very human level. But he also has another hand that reaches up and holds God's hand. And he brings us and God together, because he can empathise at a human level, but also reach out to God. So he draws us closer to God. And we can empathise with other humans. We can be alongside other humans, and we do lots of pastoral work with humans. But we can't put their hands directly into God's hands. We need Jesus, the reconciler, to be doing that for us. Now I'm going to read a special poem for you now that I've just got here. And it speaks to us about Jesus. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up still another village, where he worked in a carpenter's shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family or owned a house. He didn't go to college. He never travelled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He did none of the things one usually associates with greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when public opinion turned against him. His friends deserted him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between 2 thieves. When he was dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 20 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race, the leader of mankind's progress. All the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, all the parliaments that have ever sat, all the kings that have ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of a man on earth as much as that one solitary life. Now we're finishing now. Next week, when we come back, we'll be looking at what's gone wrong. Bye-bye. I hope you have a lovely week ahead. God bless.